In this video, we'll review how to graph cosine functions in degrees. If you want to see cosine in radians, that's a separate video. Now recall our work with Chapter 6 that with the Ferris wheel, we use cosine to measure the position of the rider's high noon shadow as he or she turns around the ride. High noon shadow referring to when the sun is directly above the rider and the shadow is directly below him. This happens at high noon. We start the rider on the extreme right-hand side of the Ferris wheel, and then rotate in a counterclockwise or positive angle of rotation. When we start on the extreme right-hand side and the sun is directly above the rider, the shadow is directly below, which will be on its extreme right-hand position. We'll refer to this as the maximum value for cosine. Now as the rider rotates to the top of the ride, the shadow will be at the center of the Ferris wheel. We'll call that the center position. From here, the rider rotates to the extreme left-hand side, and we're going to refer to this as the extreme minimum value. On a graph, typically the right-hand side is the positive values and the left side is the negative values. So when the rider's on the left-hand side, we'll say that's the minimum value that the cosine ever obtains. As the rider keeps rotating, they get back to the bottom, which means their shadow's back to being at the center. And then they rotate back to where they started from, which is the extreme right-hand side, or their maximum value for cosine. This means that cosine, when we graph it, is going to start at maximum, go to center, to minimum, to center, and back to max. So a cosine graph goes max, center, min, center, and then back to max. Now the function notation for cosine, the general form is f of x equals a cosine quantity bx plus k, where a is the amplitude, b is the frequency, and k is the vertical shift. Again, some books use different letters other than k to represent vertical shifts, but we're going to use this as what we've always used for any of our types of transformations. Now the frequency is what changes the period of the cosine graph. A higher frequency will mean a shorter period. A lower frequency will mean that it takes a longer period for the cosine to complete a cycle. The period for cosine can be found by using 360 degrees divided by the frequency, or we can find the frequency by taking 360 degrees and dividing by the period. We're going to cover horizontal shifts in a separate video. Now let's look at two cosine graphs here. I have two equations, y equals 3 cosine x minus 1, and the second problem, y equals cosine of quantity x over 2 plus 2. Now, the first problem, y equals 3 cosine x minus 1, the amplitude is 3. It says 3 cosine of x. There is a vertical shift, so k equals negative 1. To find the period, we need to first find the frequency. It says 1x, so 1 is the period, or 1 is the frequency, which means 360 degrees divided by 1, or the period is 360 degrees. Now, as far as scaling, this thing will complete a full cycle in 360 degrees. That means the fourth tick mark on the x-axis is going to be 360 degrees. Half a cycle, or the second tick mark, would be half a 360 or 180 degrees. If we want to do the quarter cycle, or the first tick mark, that would be half of 180, or 1/4 of 360, which would be 90 degrees. So it's 90, 180, 270, 360, and so on. Now the center is going to be at negative 1, which means we're going to use that as the center line. We've got to be 3 units above and 3 units below that center line, so we need to put the max and the min. Negative 1 plus 3 would be 2, so our maximum would be at 2, and negative 1 minus 3 is going to be negative 4, so our minimum would be at negative 4. We need to, at the very least, have these three values for the y-axis labeled: the minimum, the center, and the max. Now the center line is going to be that y equals negative 1. Cosine starts at max, so we're going to be 3 units above that, so we're going to start at 2. The next position is going to be at the center, so the quarter cycle would be at center, then min, then center, then max. One complete cycle has been obtained. We've gone 360 degrees, and we're back at our maximum value. Now, typically when I graph, I'm going to go 2 cycles, so we'll repeat. So from maximum, back to center, to min, to center, and then 2 full cycles is when I've gone back to max. And I'm ready to draw the curve. For example number 2, the amplitude is just 1. It just says y equals cosine. There is a vertical shift again. K is 2. Now the period on this one, a little trickier. X over 2 means that the frequency is 1/2. It's 1/2 of x. Dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. So because b is 1/2, the period is going to be 360 divided by half. 360 divided by the half is the same as saying 360 times 2. Dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So the period is 720 degrees. That means the fourth tick, or the full cycle, is going to be at 720 degrees. Half cycle would be 360 degrees, quarter cycle would be 180. So 180, 360, 540, 720, and so on. Now the center is going to be y equals 2. So I need to scale that in here. So that's going to be between 1 and 3. The maximum would be 1 unit above, which would be 3, and the minimum would be 1 unit below 2, which is going to be at 1. So we have the maximum at 3, the center at 2, the minimum at 1. Now if you want to throw some other numbers in, we can. Keeping in mind that the center is going to be y equals 2. Now cosine starts at max, so we're going to be 1 unit above 2. Our maximum is at 3. Cosine goes max, center, min, center, max. And we've gone one complete cycle. Normally I go 2 cycles, so I'm going to repeat it. From maximum, it goes to center, to minimum, to center, and 2 full cycles when we go back to maximum. And then the curve. Now here's 2 more examples. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video, work these 2 out, and then check your work. I'll give you a moment. Alright, hopefully you've had a chance to work these problems out. On example number 3, the amplitude is 4. Now I'm not going to say -4, it's the absolute value, so the amplitude is 4. We just know that it's going to start at minimum. The k, I see nothing added at the problem outside of the parentheses, so the k is 0. Now I see that we have a 12x, which means the frequency is 12. The period is going to be 360 degrees divided by 12, or only 30 degrees. This thing will go through a complete cycle in 30 degrees. So the fourth tick, or full cycle, is going to be 30 degrees. Half cycle, 15 degrees, and so on. Now we have no center height, center 0, so it's going to go 4 units above and 4 units below. So our max and min are at 4 and -4 respectively. So when we go to graph this, for negative cosine, we start at minimum, then go to center, to max, to center, to min. And that would be one complete cycle for a negative cosine. To do 2 cycles, we go from minimum to center, to max, to center, and back to minimum, and then draw the curve. Example number 4, we have f of x, this is the function now, f of x equals cosine of x over 3 minus 4. The amplitude is just 1. There is a vertical shift of -4. To find the period, we first find the frequency. The frequency here is 1/3. Dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. So 360 divided by 1/3, or if you prefer, 360 times 3, is going to be 1080 degrees. That'll be one complete cycle. So we go out to the fourth tick, 1 cycle, and call that 1080. Half of 1080 degrees is going to be 540 degrees, and then counting up by 540s, we get 540, 1080, 1620, and finally 2 cycles at 2160 degrees. Now scaling the y-axis. The center is going to be -4. We need to be 1 unit above and 1 unit below. So 1 unit above -4 would be -3, and 1 unit below -4 would be -5. So centered at -4, 1 unit above and 1 unit below. Alright, this is a positive cosine, so it's going to start at maximum. The maximum here is going to be -3. It then goes to the center when it's at -4. Its minimum, which is going to be down to -5, back to center, and then one complete cycle at 1080 degrees when we're back when the y value is -3. This graph has gone from max to center to min to center and back to max. To get 2 full cycles, we'll repeat it. So from maximum, we go back to center, to min, to center, to max. And then draw the curve. And that'll be 2 complete cycles for our positive cosine. Alright, thank you for watching this video, and hopefully it helped you understand how to graph cosines and degrees.